The sun had barely pierced the horizon on that fog-laden morning of September 12, 1916, when Nurse Clara Whitmore arrived at the edge of the Verdun front. The air smelled of gunpowder, earth, and the metallic tang of blood. Her boots sank into mud thick enough to swallow a man whole, yet she moved with the kind of purpose that left little room for fear. Behind her, the convoy of medical wagons rattled over shell-cratered roads, each vehicle groaning under the weight of stretchers, bandages, and antiseptics. Clara's hands were steady, though her heart thumped like a war drum. This was no longer a hospital in the relative safety of Paris or Reims. This was the very mouth of hell, a place where screams of the wounded and dying were as common as the morning birdsong had once been. Her diary, worn leather cover and ink-stained pages, felt heavier than any artillery shell she'd seen. In it, she recorded each face, each story, each fleeting moment of life snatched from death. As she approached the forward aid station, the scale of devastation became painfully clear. Soldiers sprawled on stretchers, some with limbs twisted in unnatural angles, others pale and silent, their eyes staring into a void only they could see. Nurses shouted instructions, doctors barked orders, and the relentless rhythm of incoming artillery punctuated every action. Clara knelt beside a young infantryman, barely 19, clutching a blood-soaked jacket around a shattered leg. "Easy there," she murmured, applying pressure to the wound. Her hands moved with practiced precision, as if each motion could ward off the shadow of death itself. He whimpered, and she offered a reassuring smile, though inside her chest, dread tightened its grip. Each patient was a life, and every second counted. There was no time for hesitation. Across the station, the hospital tent flapped violently in the wind, revealing glimpses of makeshift operating tables and bloodied instruments. The surgeons worked tirelessly, the gleam of steel contrasting with the soot-streaked faces around them. Clara paused for a moment, inhaling deeply. She knew the coming days would test her beyond anything she had ever imagined. The diary's first entry that morning captured the dissonance perfectly. "I have never seen such chaos, such suffering. And yet, in the faces of those I tend to, I see moments of resilience, glimmers of hope. If I falter, who will be here to hold the hands of the dying? Who will whisper that they are not alone?" Hours passed in a blur of motion. Clara moved from one stretcher to the next, rinsing wounds, dressing burns, and offering quiet words to those who could barely comprehend their surroundings. One soldier, a corporal named Henri, grasped her arm tightly, his lips trembling as he whispered, "Will I live?" "You will," she said firmly, even as doubt crept into her mind. She did not promise miracles, only presence. Her diary grew heavy with names, ages, hometowns, and fragments of conversations she barely had time to hear. Each entry was a thread, weaving together a tapestry of survival amidst despair. By late afternoon, a massive bombardment began along the nearby ridge. The ground trembled with each shell, sending clouds of dust and debris spiraling into the air. Clara instinctively ducked behind a stretcher, her ears ringing, yet she continued her work. Nurses moved with urgent efficiency, securing stretchers and shielding the injured as the sound of artillery became deafening. She remembered the words of her mentor before she left Paris: "You will see what no woman should see, Clara. But your hands, your heart, they will matter more than any weapon on that field." Now, facing the relentless tide of wounded, she understood exactly what had been meant. In this theater of suffering, compassion was a weapon just as potent as any rifle or artillery shell. Night fell, though darkness brought no relief. The tent was illuminated by dim lanterns and the occasional flare from distant explosions. Clara sat briefly, exhausted, and made a few hurried entries in her diary. Night descends, yet the war does not pause. The wounded arrive in waves, their cries piercing the night. "I am weary, but I cannot stop. If I rest, even for a moment, I fear the shadow of death will claim another soul before I can intervene." Her fingers ached, smeared with blood and antiseptic, but the diary felt like an anchor. Every word she wrote was a testament to endurance, a record for a world that might one day need to remember the price of courage on the front lines. Suddenly, a young man was carried into the tent, screaming in pain, his chest torn open by shrapnel. Clara's hands moved automatically, following the rhythms ingrained in her memory. The surgeons worked feverishly, and she assisted, her voice a steady counterpoint to the chaos. For hours, the battle raged within the flimsy walls of the aid station, yet through it all, Clara's focus never wavered. By dawn, the tide of casualties had lessened, and a fragile silence enveloped the tent. Clara slumped against a post, her diary open across her lap. The pages were soaked with her tears, sweat, and the grime of war. She wrote, "We survived the night, yet the war goes on. Each face, each life saved or lost, will remain with me forever. I am a witness, a guardian, a nurse in a world gone mad. And still, I write, for tomorrow will demand the same courage, the same resolve." The morning sun rose over Verdun, casting light on a battlefield scarred by relentless violence. Clara stood, steadied herself, and readied for another day. The war would not end here, and neither would her duty. The nurse's diary, healing in hell on the front lines. The dawn of September 13th broke over Verdun like a fragile promise. Mist clung to the cratered earth, masking the devastation that lay beneath. Clara Whitmore emerged from the aid station tent, her uniform stiff with yesterday's blood and mud, yet her determination remained unshaken. Each morning brought the same realization: the battle had not paused, and neither could she. She moved down the makeshift pathways between tents, noting the sleeping soldiers, their faces pale even in sleep, some with hands clenched over injuries too severe to mend completely. Clara's eyes lingered on one young man, barely 17, whose breathing was shallow and uneven. He had been brought in during the night, and despite the surgeon's best efforts, his wounds were grievous. She placed a hand gently on his arm, murmuring, "Hold on. We are here with you." The diary rested in her satchel, a silent companion recording every triumph, every sorrow. She opened it and wrote with deliberate care. "Every face I see is a story, every cry a call I cannot ignore. The line between life and death is razor thin here, and I walk it daily. Yet, in each moment, I find purpose. I am witness and healer, bound to this chaos by something deeper than fear." By mid-morning, the first wave of wounded from the front arrived. The shelling had intensified overnight, and stretcher-bearers brought men in pairs, sometimes triples, dragging those who could not walk under their own power. Clara's team moved with the precision of a machine, yet no machinery could replicate the human compassion that guided their hands. She rinsed burns, stitched lacerations, and administered morphine, her voice a constant tether to the fraying courage of the soldiers. One soldier, Private Louis Benoit, screamed as she cleaned a deep shrapnel wound along his torso. Blood coated her gloves and uniform, yet Clara worked with calm authority. "Breathe with me, Louis," she instructed, her voice firm but soothing. He trembled, eyes wide with terror. "I'm right here. You're safe for now." The diary captured the scene in stark detail. Fear is a companion as constant as the enemy's artillery. It is in the eyes of those I treat, in the quivering hands and the shallow breaths. And yet, even in terror, I see moments of trust. They surrender to my care, and I cannot betray that surrender. Hours passed in a relentless cycle of triage and treatment. Clara barely noticed the sun climbing the sky, obscured as it was by smoke, mist, and the gray pall of battle. Outside the tent, the air was alive with the whine of incoming shells, the distant roar of explosions, and the staccato bursts of rifle fire. Clara could feel the ground tremble beneath her feet with each impact, yet she continued her work, moving from one stretcher to the next, as if propelled by some unseen force. At noon, an order came from the field command. A forward team had been overrun, and more casualties were imminent. Clara's stomach twisted, but she could not falter. She prepared the tent for the influx, ensuring stretchers were ready, supplies organized, and water sterilized. The younger nurses looked to her for guidance, their fear barely masked behind determined expressions. Clara placed a hand on one shoulder. "Stay focused. Remember your training. Each life matters, and you can make a difference." The new wave of wounded arrived, and among them was Sergeant Marcel Durant, one of the senior officers on the front line. His face was pale, his uniform shredded, and his arm hung at an unnatural angle. Clara assessed the damage, directing the surgical team with precision. She cleaned the wound, applied a splint, and monitored his vital signs, all while maintaining a steady dialogue to keep him conscious. "You're doing well, Sergeant. Stay with me," she said, her voice calm, unwavering, a lifeline in the storm. Her diary entry that afternoon reflected the unrelenting nature of the work. The wounded come in waves, as relentless as the artillery outside. Their suffering is raw and unfiltered, yet they cling to life with a resilience I can scarcely comprehend. My hands ache, my back burns, but I cannot stop. Every second of hesitation could mean death. And yet, in this hell, I find the human spirit refusing to yield. As night approached, the aid station became a maze of bandages, blood-stained sheets, and exhausted voices. Clara moved through it like a conductor of a symphony composed of pain and courage. Each nurse, each soldier, each patient was a note in the composition, and she orchestrated them with gentle authority. The night was punctuated by a massive bombardment on the eastern ridge. The ground shook violently, and debris rained upon the tents. Clara instinctively dove behind a stretcher, her heart hammering, but her hands never ceased their work. Soldiers screamed, nurses shouted instructions, and Clara guided them with unwavering presence. Among the chaos, she discovered a young medic trapped under a fallen tent pole, his uniform torn and bloodied. Without hesitation, she freed him, checking for injuries before returning him to the safety of the triage area. "We survived together," she said, a mantra she repeated silently as she moved on to the next emergency. The diary that night bore witness to her exhaustion and resolve. "I am bone-tired, my muscles scream, and my mind reels from the unending tide of suffering. Yet, I cannot falter. These men, these boys, rely on my hands, my focus, my heart. If I stop, even for a moment, they may not see another dawn. And so I write, I heal, I endure." By dawn, the station was eerily quiet, though the calm was deceptive. The air smelled of spent gunpowder, blood, and sweat. Clara stepped outside, surveying the battered landscape. The Verdun front stretched endlessly, a scar upon the earth, a testament to the unyielding brutality of war. Yet amidst it, she saw small victories, a soldier smiling weakly after successful surgery, a nurse comforting a frightened recruit, and the resilience of those who refused to surrender to despair. Her diary, thick with entries, had become more than a record, it was a lifeline, a testament, a chronicle of human endurance. She wrote, "The night has passed, and though the world is broken, life persists. The wounded are tended, the injured recover, and the human spirit clings stubbornly to existence. I am but one among many, yet I feel the weight of every life I touch. Tomorrow will bring more suffering, more challenges, and more chances to bear witness to courage." As she prepared for another day, Clara paused to glance at the horizon. Smoke rose in the distance, a constant reminder that Verdun was far from over. And yet, she felt a deep sense of purpose. Each bandage, each touch, each whispered word of reassurance was a stand against the darkness. In the diary's pages, she captured not only the horror of war but also the undying flame of compassion, a light in a world consumed by fire. The nurse's diary, healing in hell on the front lines. The dawn of September 14th brought with it a deceptive calm. Verdun's battered landscape was quiet, save for the distant rumble of artillery and the occasional crack of rifle fire. Clara Whitmore emerged from the makeshift aid station, exhausted yet determined, knowing the lull was temporary. She adjusted her uniform, wiped the sweat and blood from her brow, and checked her diary, the pages now swelling with the weight of unspoken horrors and heroic deeds. Inside the tent, the wounded lay in varying states of suffering. Clara's team worked tirelessly, moving from patient to patient with methodical precision. Yet, each task seemed heavier than the last. The weight of fatigue bore down on her, but she refused to succumb. Her eyes fell on a young private, barely 18, trembling as he recounted the events of the night before. He had been at the forward trenches when the shelling intensified, losing comrades to shrapnel and gunfire. Clara knelt beside him, her hands steady as she dressed his wounds. "You survived," she said softly. "That is proof of your strength." The diary in her satchel beckoned. Clara opened it, letting her pen flow across the paper. "The men speak in fragments of memory and terror, but within those shards, I see courage. Each life saved is a defiance of the darkness surrounding us. I must record this, lest the world forget the resilience, the sacrifices, and the unbearable burden we carry." By mid-morning, reports reached the aid station of a renewed offensive on the eastern ridge. Clara's heart tightened. The lull had indeed been temporary. The forward lines were under heavy attack, and the wounded would arrive in waves, many carrying injuries too severe for immediate survival. She rallied her nurses, her voice firm and resolute. "Prepare for the worst. Organize the stretchers, sterilize the instruments, and ensure every bandage is ready. Lives will depend on us today." As the first group of casualties arrived, Clara's skills were put to the ultimate test. She encountered soldiers with compound fractures, deep shrapnel wounds, and burns so severe that the very air seemed to hiss in protest as she tended them. Yet she moved with deliberate care, each action precise, each word chosen to instill calm. "Breathe with me," she urged a young corporal whose face was pale and slick with sweat. "We are here. You are safe in this moment." Hours blurred together. Clara barely noticed the rising sun, obscured as it was by smoke and the acrid scent of gunpowder. The air inside the tent was heavy with the metallic tang of blood and antiseptic. Nurses moved like specters, their faces etched with fatigue, yet their hands steady. Clara directed the triage with unyielding authority, delegating tasks, monitoring vital signs, and performing emergency procedures as if possessed by a force greater than herself. In the midst of the chaos, a massive explosion rocked the eastern perimeter. Clara ducked instinctively, shielding a group of injured soldiers. Tent poles groaned under the pressure, canvas flapped violently, and debris scattered like deadly confetti. Despite the fear clawing at her, she continued to move through the carnage, tending to wounds, calming panicked men, and ensuring no one was left unattended. Among the new arrivals was Lieutenant Henri Dubois, a seasoned officer with a reputation for bravery. His uniform was torn, blood seeping through the fabric, his leg shattered by a direct hit. Clara assessed the damage swiftly, instructing the nurses to stabilize him. She applied a splint, checked his pulse, and monitored his breathing, speaking in calm, deliberate tones. "Lieutenant, hold on. We will see this through together. You are not alone." Her diary captured the intensity of the moment. "The battlefield is a maelstrom, yet we exist within a pocket of control, a fragile domain where life is defended against unrelenting death. Each soldier I touch is a reminder of the stakes, a plea for endurance, a testament to human tenacity. I write because words can hold what the chaos cannot erase." The day wore on, and Clara found herself exhausted beyond comprehension. Yet there was no respite. Reports came of another unit trapped behind enemy lines, casualties mounting with every passing hour. She directed the triage tent to prepare for the influx, ensuring stretchers were ready, supplies stocked, and water sterilized. The younger nurses, despite their fatigue, looked to her for guidance. Clara placed a hand on one shoulder, steadying the trembling recruit. Focus on the task at hand. One patient at a time. That is how we survive this. As evening approached, the intensity of the bombardment lessened slightly, allowing Clara a moment to breathe. She stepped outside the tent, surveying the devastated landscape. The horizon was a haze of smoke, mud, and shattered trees. The Verdun front, scarred and broken, stretched endlessly, yet amidst the destruction, she saw signs of resilience, a soldier adjusting his bandages, a nurse assisting another with a fresh patient, and the human spirit refusing to yield. Inside her diary, she recorded the moment with careful reflection. We are shadows in the chaos, yet our actions are tangible. Every life saved, every wound treated, every comfort offered is a stand against the overwhelming tide of destruction. I am weary beyond measure, yet I am compelled forward. For in these moments, we hold fast to the fragile flame of hope. Night fell with oppressive weight. Clara moved through the dimly lit tent, lanterns casting flickering shadows across blood-stained sheets and weary faces. The wounded murmured in delirium, nightmares bleeding into reality, and the nurses worked with relentless precision to maintain order. Clara's hands moved almost instinctively, guided by muscle memory, training, and the indomitable will to preserve life. During a lull, she observed a young recruit, barely conscious, clutching a photograph of a family left behind. She knelt beside him, offering water and gentle words. "You will see them again," she whispered, her voice carrying a warmth that defied the chill of the battlefield. The diary captured the encounter. Even in the darkest moments, humanity asserts itself. A touch, a word, a glance, these are the lifelines that bridge the abyss. War strips the world bare, yet in these small gestures, we reclaim our humanity. The night was punctuated by sporadic artillery, each blast a reminder of the danger beyond the tent walls. Clara guided the nurses through emergency procedures, repositioned stretchers to avoid structural weaknesses, and administered care with unwavering focus. Every movement was deliberate, every decision critical, and every moment demanded her full attention. Hours later, as the first light of dawn began to creep over Verdun, the tent was silent but for the soft moans of the recovering wounded. Clara sat down briefly, exhaustion threatening to overwhelm her, yet she opened her diary once more. We have survived another night. The wounded are tended, the injured stabilized, yet the battle rages on. My body aches, my mind is frayed, but my purpose is clear. I am witness, healer, and chronicler. In these pages, I etch the reality of our existence, the courage of those who endure, and the small victories that sustain us. Outside, the landscape bore the scars of relentless combat. Verdun, scarred and battered, remained a crucible of human endurance. Clara knew the day ahead would bring more wounded, more suffering, and more moments that would test every ounce of her strength. Yet she remained steadfast, guided by the knowledge that her presence could mean the difference between life and death. Her diary, now thick with entries, was more than a record, it was a testament. It held the stories of courage, compassion, and resilience, ensuring that even amidst the chaos, the human spirit would not be forgotten. The battlefield is unyielding, yet we endure. Each life preserved, each wound treated, each act of care is a defiance of the darkness. Tomorrow will test us again, yet we will rise. For in the midst of hell, healing persists. The nurse's diary, healing in hell on the front lines. The morning of September 15th arrived like a brutal promise. The sun broke over Verdun, filtering through a sky still heavy with smoke and ash. Clara Whitmore stepped out of the aid station tent, her boots sinking into mud churned by constant artillery fire. She carried her diary close, a repository of the night's events, of lives saved, and of souls lost. The previous night had tested her in ways that words barely captured, yet she knew the coming hours would demand even more. Reports arrived of a renewed assault along the northern sector. Clara gathered her nurses and gave concise, deliberate instructions. Prepare the stretchers. Ready the morphine. Sterilize every instrument. We are the last line before despair reaches them. No errors. Her voice, though calm, carried the weight of authority and necessity. These words were not merely directives, they were a lifeline for those who depended upon them. The first wave of casualties emerged from the chaos beyond the trenches. Soldiers, bloodied and broken, were carried on makeshift stretchers, many crying out in pain or shock. Clara moved among them, her hands steady, her mind focused. She examined shattered limbs, applied tourniquets, and offered soft words to calm the terrified. You are safe here. We will see this through. Among the wounded was Captain Émile Laurent, an officer whose bravery had become legendary along the front. He had sustained a severe abdominal wound from shell fragments, his uniform soaked with blood. Clara assessed his injuries swiftly, guiding her team to stabilize him for surgery. Hold still, Captain, she said, her voice gentle but firm. You will live through this, and we will make certain of it. The diary in her satchel seemed to thrum with the pulse of the battlefield. Clara paused to write a brief entry, capturing both the horrors and the courage she witnessed. The wounded arrive in endless waves, each face a testament to survival and fear. My hands are steady, yet my heart quakes. I write to preserve their stories, to honor each life, to ensure that even amidst death, humanity endures. As the hours passed, Clara faced a seemingly insurmountable barrage of injury and exhaustion. The triage tent was a theater of controlled chaos, nurses moved like ghosts, lanterns flickered across mud-smeared floors, and the groans of the wounded filled the air. Clara directed her team with precision, ensuring that every patient received the care they needed while maintaining order in the growing storm of suffering. A sudden explosion rocked the tent's edge, sending dust and debris into the air. Clara ducked instinctively, protecting her team and the injured. A shell had landed nearby, its blast rattling bones and shattering temporary structures. Without pause, she resumed her work, guiding nurses to stabilize the panicked patients, reposition stretchers, and continue treatment despite the chaos. The diary became her anchor. Even as the world shakes around us, we hold firm. Each patient, each life, is a stand against the darkness. In this hell, our actions are small miracles, and each miracle matters. Later, a stretcher-bearer arrived with a severely wounded young private, barely conscious. His leg had been shattered in the offensive, and blood loss was critical. Clara knelt beside him, speaking softly. You are not alone. We will carry you through this. Breathe with me. She applied pressure to slow the bleeding, guided her nurses to prepare a transfusion, and kept his spirits alive with her voice, her presence, and her unwavering confidence. Throughout the day, Clara faced one harrowing decision after another. Supplies were dwindling, and some instruments had been damaged in the bombardment. She improvised, sterilizing instruments over small flames, repurposing torn linens into bandages, and using any available material to save lives. Each action demanded careful thought, yet it was executed with near-automatic precision born from experience and sheer determination. A particularly critical moment came when Lieutenant Dubois, still recovering from his leg injury, began showing signs of shock. Clara immediately recognized the danger. She stabilized his vitals, administered fluids, and guided him into a shaded area to prevent further trauma. She directed her team with sharp, precise commands, ensuring that every step of treatment was executed without hesitation. As the afternoon wore on, the wounded continued to pour in, and Clara's exhaustion reached a peak she could scarcely comprehend. Her vision blurred at times, but her resolve remained unbroken. She leaned briefly against a tent post, taking a moment to breathe, then returned to her post without hesitation. "Exhaustion gnaws at the edges of my being," she wrote, "but I cannot yield. Each life saved is a victory against the ceaseless tide of destruction. I am bound to these men, to their hope, and to the duty that defines us in this war." By evening, the magnitude of the previous days and days' work became evident. The tent was lined with rows of wounded, each receiving attention, comfort, and hope. Clara moved from one to the next, her presence a source of reassurance. Nurses, though weary, followed her guidance with unwavering loyalty. Together, they became a bulwark against the relentless reality of war. Nightfall brought another wave of challenges. Artillery resumed its merciless rhythm, and isolated gunfire echoed through the ruined landscape. Clara worked through the darkness, guiding nurses and tending to the gravely wounded. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency, yet every action was imbued with compassion. During a rare lull, she addressed a group of nurses huddled together in exhaustion. "We are not failing," she said firmly. "Every life preserved, every wound treated, every moment of care, these are victories. Hold to that. Remember that when it seems too much." A young nurse, tears streaming down her dirt-streaked face, whispered, "But there are so many, Clara. We can't save them all." Clara knelt beside her, steadying the trembling shoulders. "Then we save the ones we can. And in saving them, we honor all the rest. Focus on what is within your hands." Throughout the night, the diary chronicled the unrelenting battle between life and death, compassion and horror. The wounded speak in quiet, fearful murmurs. Each face tells a story of terror and bravery intertwined. I write their names, their fears, their triumphs. Even in this inferno, we preserve fragments of humanity, one act of care at a time. Near midnight, Clara faced her most harrowing moment. A convoy of soldiers arrived from a newly attacked sector, many of them critically wounded, some barely clinging to life. The aid station was overwhelmed. Clara assessed the situation and made split-second decisions: prioritize surgery for those most likely to survive, stabilize the critically injured, and comfort the dying. She coordinated her team with unwavering clarity, transforming chaos into a structured, life-saving operation. A shell burst nearby, sending the tent roof flapping violently. Clara shielded a young recruit with her own body, whispering reassurances as debris fell around them. Despite the fear, she resumed her work within moments, each action deliberate, each decision life-saving. "The night stretches endlessly," she wrote, "yet within this darkness, light persists. It is in the hands of those who heal, who comfort, and who refuse to surrender to despair. I am part of that light, however faint it may seem." Dawn finally broke over Verdun on September 16. Clara emerged from the tent, her face smeared with grime and tears, but her eyes bright with determination. The battlefield, scarred and silent for the moment, bore witness to the toll of relentless conflict. Yet amidst the devastation, Clara saw signs of resilience: soldiers preparing to return to the front, nurses assisting the recovering wounded, and human perseverance refusing to yield. Her diary, now heavy with pages, bore testimony to every moment. "We have endured the unendurable. Lives have been saved, suffering eased, and hope preserved. Yet the battle is not over. Tomorrow will demand the same courage, the same resolve, the same relentless compassion. And we will rise to meet it, for in these acts, we are more than survivors, we are guardians of humanity amidst the storm of war." Clara closed the diary, her hands trembling from exhaustion, yet her heart held a fierce, unyielding pride. The aid station, though battered, had withstood the night's trials. The wounded were alive, hope had endured, and her nurses remained steadfast. In the face of unimaginable horrors, they had all acted with courage, skill, and humanity. Verdun remained a crucible of suffering and resilience, a place where ordinary people had become extraordinary in their endurance. Clara Whitmore's diary would survive long after the guns fell silent, a testament to the courage of those who faced hell and continued to heal, to save, and to record the truth of war's human cost. In the face of death, we give life. In the face of despair, we offer hope. In the face of hell, we heal. And that is our victory.